Welcome back to the Journeyman Podcast, everybody. If you're enjoying these deep dives, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes.
Definitely.
We are on episode 4 today, and this one is a doozy.
It really is.
We're diving into whether there's like systemic deep corruption within the U.S. government, a hidden force some call the machine.
Ooh, the machine. I like it.
Yeah, it's pretty wild stuff.
Sounds like a movie.
Yeah.
We've got some fascinating source material today. Some of it dives into like specific historical and contemporary examples of corruption,
Right.
while others lay out this whole machine theory, suggesting it's not just a few bad apples,
Right.
but a rotten system designed to benefit a select few at the top. So,
Okay, so let's start by unpacking some of the evidence that's presented for this machine idea.
yeah.
One of the sources claims that stagnant wages are like a key indicator that the machine is at work,
Okay.
essentially siphoning off the wealth from everyday Americans.
Interesting.
What do you make of that argument?
It's a provocative claim, for sure. The idea that this like hidden entity
Right.
is actively suppressing wages to maintain power, that's a pretty unsettling thought.
Yeah,
But it goes beyond just wages.
yeah.
This source suggests that the machine deliberately creates threats and crises to generate profit and maintain control.
See, now that's where I start to get a little skeptical.
Okay.
I mean, it's one thing to say there's corruption in the system,
Sure.
but like attributing every problem to this shadowy machine
Yeah.
seems like a bit of a stretch, don't you think?
I understand the skepticism. I think it's healthy to question these sorts of claims.
Right.
But let's look at some of the examples the source provides.
Okay.
They point to things like the military-industrial complex, arguing that it thrives on endless wars.
Right.
And these like manufactured conflicts.
Mm.
They also mention the revolving door between government and corporations, suggesting that it allows for undue influence
Uh-huh.
and policies that only serve themselves.
Those are valid points. We've certainly seen instances where corporate interests
Yes.
have seemed to outweigh the needs of the people.
For sure.
But is that evidence of a coordinated conspiracy
Mm.
or just the result of, lobbying efforts in a flawed system?
That's the key question, isn't it? Is it deliberate manipulation?
Right,
Or just a system that's vulnerable to exploitation?
right,
The source also highlights historical examples like Watergate and the Iran-Contra Affair,
right,
arguing that they demonstrate the machine's long-standing influence.
right. Those were major scandals, no doubt about it.
Huge.
But both were eventually exposed and led to consequences.
That's true.
Doesn't that suggest that the system, while flawed, can self-correct?
It's true that those scandals were exposed.
Right.
But the source argues that those were only the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, wow.
They claim that the machine is so deeply entrenched that it can control the narrative, cover up its tracks, and escape any real accountability.
So they're saying that even when we think we're seeing justice served, it's actually just the machine manipulating events to maintain its grip on power.
That's their argument.
It feels a bit like chasing shadows, doesn't it?
It can feel that way, but the source contends that the evidence is all around us if we know where to look.
Okay.
Point to things like stagnant wages, increasing income inequality, and the erosion of civil liberties as proof of the machine's influence.
Okay, but those are complex issues with multiple contributing factors.
Of course.
How can we be sure the machine is the root cause
Right.
rather than economic forces or political choices or social trends?
That's where things get really tricky.
Yeah,
The source acknowledges that proving the machine's existence is difficult
right.
because it operates in the shadows.
Hmm.
They argue that its power lies in deception and the ability to control information.
So it's a bit of a catch-22, right?
Kinda, yeah.
They're saying that the lack of concrete evidence is actually evidence of their existence
Yeah.
because they're so good at hiding.
It's a circular argument for sure, but the source insists that if we connect the dots, the pattern becomes clear.
Okay,
They point to things like the alleged Kleptocracy Club,
right.
this group of powerful individuals using their wealth and influence to manipulate the system for their own gain.
Now, I've heard about this Kleptocracy Club idea,
Yeah.
but I'm still not entirely clear on what it is or how it supposedly operates.
Yeah.
Can you shed some light on that for me?
Sure. It's essentially the idea that this small group of ultra-wealthy individuals,
Okay,
often with ties to foreign governments or corporations,
okay.
use them money and connections to buy influence and shape policies to further enrich themselves.
So are they saying this Kleptocracy Club is the same thing as the machine? Or are they separate entities working together?
The source isn't entirely clear on that point.
Okay.
It's possible they see the Kleptocracy Club as like a manifestation of the machine,
Hmm.
or perhaps as a key component of its operation.
Okay.
The source also mentions the indictment of Michael Madigan,
Right.
the former Illinois House Speaker, as an example of how deeply embedded corruption can be.
Right. That was a huge case.
It was
He was accused of using his position for personal gain for decades.
decades, yeah.
It's hard to believe someone could get away with that for so long.
It certainly raises questions about how widespread and deeply rooted corruption might be.
Yeah.
And the source argues that Madigan's case is just one example among many.
Oh, wow.
They suggest that similar schemes are playing out at all levels of government.
So their argument is that these seemingly isolated cases are actually symptoms of a larger systemic problem.
That seems to be the gist, yeah.
That the machine isn't just a shadowy organization, it's the very fabric of the system itself.
That seems to be the core of their argument, yeah.
It's a pretty bleak outlook, I have to
It
say.
is.
But I'm still struggling to reconcile the lack of concrete proof
Sure.
with such sweeping claims.
I understand.
I mean, where's the smoking gun?
The source argues that the smoking gun is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It's the feeling that things aren't right, that the system isn't working for everyday people.
Right.
It's the sense that we're being manipulated and controlled by forces beyond our understanding.
That's a pretty powerful argument, I had to admit.
It is.
It taps into a lot of the anxieties and frustrations that people are feeling right now.
Yeah.
But is it fair to attribute all of that to this nebulous machine without more concrete evidence?
That's the debate we're having here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it a convenient scapegoat for
Right.
complex problems, or a genuine threat that we need to understand and address?
And that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of this deep dive.
Exactly.
We'll delve further into the evidence both for and against the machine theory and try to make sense of it all.
We'll try.
Stick with us, listeners. We've got a lot more to unpack.
A lot more to unpack.
So we're back and ready to dig a little deeper into this machine theory.
Yeah, let's do it.
We were talking before about how hard it is to pin down concrete evidence,
Right.
for this
It
idea
is tricky.
that there's this machine and they're responsible for everything.
For sure.
One of the sources actually acknowledges this difficulty,
Yeah.
and they argue that the machine thrives on secrecy
Right.
and manipulation,
Makes sense.
making it almost impossible to expose through traditional means.
Hmm.
They make a pretty interesting comparison. They say trying to prove the machine exists.
Okay.
It's like trying to prove the existence of a virus
Oh.
before the invention of microscopes.
Interesting.
You can see the symptoms, the effects,
Right.
but the actual cause remains hidden.
They like that analogy. That's a good one.
Yeah.
It suggests that we need to develop new tools and methods
Right.
to detect and understand these systems of power.
So if traditional methods of investigation aren't enough,
Yeah.
what are they suggesting we do? How do we see this virus, so to speak?
Well, the source emphasizes the importance of critical thinking
Okay.
and connecting the dots.
Yeah.
They urge us to look beyond individual events
Mhm.
and try to discern the underlying patterns and motive.
So look for the bigger picture,
Exactly.
not just the individual things that are happening.
Right.
Okay.
They also talk about the importance of following the money.
Right. The old follow the money.
Always a good strategy.
Right. Yeah.
They argue that if we trace the flow of wealth and power,
Uh-huh.
we'll eventually uncover the machinations of the machine.
Okay. So it all comes down to money and power.
Well, they suggest that the machine isn't just about accumulating wealth.
Okay.
It's about maintaining control. They argue that money is simply a tool
Right.
to achieve that end.
So what are some of the ways they claim the machine exerts control then?
They point to the media,
Okay.
arguing that it's largely controlled by the machine
Uh-huh.
and used to shape public opinion and manipulate narratives.
Okay.
They also mention the education system,
Interesting.
suggesting that it's designed to produce compliant citizens rather than critical thinkers.
Those are pretty bold claims.
They
I mean, I know there's been a lot of debate about media bias
Sure.
and the influence of corporate interests.
Yeah.
But to say that the entire education system is designed to create a docile population
Yeah.
seems a bit extreme, don't you think?
It's certainly a provocative argument.
Right.
And while I wouldn't necessarily endorse that view outright,
Right.
I think it's worth considering the ways in which our institutions and systems can be subtly shaped to reinforce existing power structures.
So it's not necessarily about like deliberate indoctrination,
Right.
but maybe a more subtle form of control.
Yeah, like a kind of soft power
Okay.
that influences our perceptions and limits our choices.
Right. I see what you mean.
Exactly. The source argues that the machine doesn't need to resort to overt coercion or violence
Okay.
because it's created a system that subtly guides our thoughts and behaviors.
So it's kind of like we're being nudged in a certain direction
Exactly.
without even realizing it.
They even go so far as to say that the machine has engineered a culture of fear and division to keep people distracted and prevent them from uniting against their common oppressor.
So it's all about divide and conquer, basically.
That's the idea, yeah. They point to things like the constant threat of terrorism,
Right.
the demonization of political opponents,
Yeah.
and the manufactured outrage that dominates our news cycles as examples of this strategy.
So they're saying that by keeping us afraid and divided,
Yeah,
the machine can maintain its grip on power.
that's my argument.
It's a chilling thought, but I have to admit, it does resonate with some of the trends we're seeing in society today.
It's definitely a perspective worth considering.
Yeah, for sure.
And it raises an important question. If the machine really is this pervasive and powerful,
Right.
what can we do about it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
The source offers a few suggestions,
Okay.
but they're not exactly easy solutions.
Right.
They talk about the need for a mass awakening,
Okay.
a collective realization that the system is rigged against us.
Like a raising of consciousness?
Yep.
Okay.
They also emphasize the importance of individual action,
Right.
urging people to resist the machine's control
Yeah.
by questioning everything, seeking alternative sources of information,
Uh-huh.
and building communities based on trust and cooperation.
It's about taking back our power
Right.
on an individual level
Okay.
and a collective level.
They even go so far as to suggest that a nonviolent revolution may be necessary
Wow.
to dismantle the machine
Okay.
and create a more just and equitable society.
Now, that's a pretty radical proposition.
It is.
But the source argues that desperate times call for desperate measures. I believe that the stakes are simply too high to settle for incremental change or reform.
It's a lot to take in, I have to say.
It is a lot.
And I'm still wrestling with whether the machine is a real entity,
Right.
a convenient metaphor,
Yeah.
or something in between.
It's a tough one to wrap your head around.
It really is.
But one thing I keep coming back to is this.
Yeah.
Even if we don't fully buy into the machine theory, there's no denying that corruption exists,
Right.
that power can be abused,
Of course.
and that systems can be manipulated to benefit a select few.
Absolutely. And regardless of whether we believe in a shadowy organization pulling the strings,
Yeah.
we have a responsibility to be aware of these dynamics, to question the narratives we're fed, and to hold those in power accountable.
Couldn't agree more.
And that's where I think we need to focus our attention in the final part of this deep dive.
Okay, sounds good.
We've explored the evidence for and against the machine theory.
We have.
But now it's time to consider what we can do individually and collectively to create a more just and equitable world.
I like it. Let's get practical.
Yeah, let's move beyond the theoretical and explore some strategies
Exactly.
for addressing the challenges we face regardless of whether we attribute them to the machine
Right.
or simply to human fallibility and the inherent flaws in our systems.
Sounds good to me.
Stick with us, listeners, as we continue this journey together. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our journey into this machine theory.
It's been quite a ride.
It has been, we've explored the claims, the evidence, the arguments for and against.
Yeah.
This whole idea of like a hidden force controlling everything.
Right, right.
Whether we call it the machine or just acknowledge that there is systemic corruption and concentration of power.
Yeah.
The question remains, what can we do about it?
Well, one thing that both sources seem to agree on,
Okay.
despite their different perspectives, is the importance of awareness.
Mm,
The more we understand how these systems operate,
right.
the better equipped we are to challenge them.
So knowledge is power, like they say.
In a way, yes, but it's not just about accumulating information.
Okay.
It's about developing critical thinking skills,
Right.
questioning the narratives that we're given,
Yeah.
learning to see the world through different lenses.
One of the sources uses this really interesting metaphor. They talk about the need to develop cognitive immunity
Ooh, I like that.
to the manipulations of the machine.
That's a good one. It's about building up our defenses
Yeah.
against propaganda, misinformation,
Right.
and the subtle ways in which power can be used to shape our perceptions and control our behavior.
So how do we develop this cognitive immunity?
Yeah, what are some practical steps?
Right, exactly.
Well, one key element is diversifying our sources of information.
Okay.
Instead of relying on a handful of mainstream media outlets,
Yeah.
we need to seek out independent voices,
Yeah.
alternative perspectives,
Yeah.
challenge our own biases.
It's also about being aware of our own emotional responses.
Absolutely.
The machine theory argues that fear, anger, and division
Yeah,
are powerful tools for manipulation.
very powerful.
So learning to recognize when those emotions are being triggered
Right.
and taking a step back to assess the situation critically can be really helpful.
For sure. And, that analytical source we looked at the one that didn't necessarily buy into the whole machine theory,
Right.
they also emphasized the importance of civic engagement.
Okay.
They argued that participating in the political process, advocating for reforms, holding our elected officials accountable,
Yeah.
because these are all crucial for combating corruption and ensuring that the system serves the people, not just a select few.
So even if we don't believe in this shadowy cabal pulling the strings,
Right.
there are still things we can do to make a difference.
Absolutely. Whether we're talking about voting,
Right?
contacting our representatives, supporting organizations that align with our values, or simply having informed conversations with our friends and family.
Yeah.
Every action, no matter how small, can contribute to a more just and equitable society.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of these challenges sometimes.
It is.
But, it's important to remember that change happens incrementally.
Right.
It's about shifting the balance of power one step at a time.
And the Mamin theory source actually makes an interesting point about this.
Okay.
They argue that the machine is ultimately a fragile entity.
Oh, wow.
It relies on secrecy, deception, and compliance.
Hmm.
If enough people wake up to its machinations and refuse to play along,
Yeah.
it will crumble.
So they're saying that even if the machine exists, it's not invincible.
That's the message they seem to be conveying.
That the power ultimately rests with the people.
Exactly. And whether or not we believe in the literal existence of the me,
Right.
I think there's something empowering about that idea.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we're not powerless.
We have agency. We can choose to resist, to challenge, to create a better world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
That's a great note to end on. It's been a wild bide exploring the dark underbelly of power.
It has.
Grappling with this idea of, a hidden force controlling our lives.
A lot to think about.
But ultimately, I think this deep dive has been about more than just the machine.
I agree.
It's been about questioning everything, challenging our assumptions.
Yeah.
And recognizing our own power to shape the world around us.
Well said.
And that's what the Journeyman podcast is all about.
Exactly.
We're here to explore the big questions, challenge conventional wisdom.
For sure.
And empower you, our listeners.
That's right.
Become more informed, more engaged, and more active citizens.
Keep those minds sharp.
Yes, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep pushing for a better world.
Couldn't agree more.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends.
Definitely spread the word.
Until next time, keep those minds open and those journeys going.